What's good, YouTube? And today I wanted to do a discussion type video talking about the new format. Last Monday we received a ban list and it was crazy. I'm not gonna go over the ban list in particular. I know you guys have all seen it. I missed my chance to do a live reaction. But I do still want to discuss the upcoming format. Next weekend we have YCS Leo, YCS Peru, and then the weekend after that we have YCS Anaheim, all under the new time rules and new tournament structure. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about the decks of the format. So just to briefly go over the main changes on the ban list, we received major hits to Vanquish Soul, basically, in my opinion, killing the deck for the most part. That's a little bit of a spoiler for the tier list. I don't think that the deck is very good anymore. And we received minor hits to Yummy and some major hits to Mitsurugi Rizel, not killing Mitsurugi or Rizel, which I appreciate, but severing the connection between the two decks. And then pretty good hits for Malice, hurting the consistency even more. Malice was already an inconsistent deck, but now it's extremely inconsistent in my opinion. And it's more able to be hand trapped. I don't know what I was trying to say there. It's less resilient, excuse me, to hand traps. With Splash Mage getting banned now, like cards like Valor and Imperm are a lot better because now you can't just extend with a Splash Mage. It also makes a lot of your starters worse. Like Field Spell's not a one card starter anymore without cards like GWC, not GWC, TB11, excuse me. And then also cards like same thing with White Rabbit. White Rabbit also needs TB11 in order to be a one card starter. But yeah, so I think that the format that we're going into is going to be a lot more healthy, in my opinion. I thought that Vanquish Soul, while a cool deck, definitely, it was very high roll in the way that it played. Vanquish Soul either bricked really hard or drew insane and would summon 5 monsters on your first turn, which I didn't think was good for competitive play. I felt like the deck, it was so powerful that people would still play it, but in my opinion, it was just such an inconsistent deck for a long tournament. And it was frustrating to play against because sometimes you would have a really easy time against Vanquish Soul, you'd play a fair game and you'd win, or sometimes it was just completely unwinnable. Like they would open Phantasme, Fualos, Holy Sue with Fire Dark. Like it's just too oppressive. So I think removing that deck from the format will just make the format a lot better in general. But I digress. We're gonna go through this tier list, and I'm gonna talk about each deck and how I feel is going to do in the upcoming YCSs. So the way that I've structured this tier list, instead of structuring it tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, that's a little bit boring. I kind of want to talk about how I think that these decks will do in the new structure for tournaments, because as you guys now know, there's no more like actual top 32 cut off. There's only a top 8 cutoff, so that's the highest tier. Is what decks do I think can make it into those 8 players, which is a crazy small cutoff. It's like the top 0.2% of, not 0.2%, top 2% of the players that enter a average YCS. So it's actually insane, but I digress. So let's start the tier list. The first deck that I wanted to talk about was Orcust. Orcus obviously won the NAWCQ, but and I don't recall if he was playing a Fiendsmith version. I feel like he was playing a Fiendsmith version, but without Moon of the Close Guy, there's no way to bridge from Orcus cards to Fiendsmith cards effectively. But I don't think that this deck is terrible. I actually think that this deck is a little bit slept on right now. I don't think that this deck is out at day one. I do think that this is a day two type of deck. I don't necessarily trust it to be in the top 32 or get multiple top 32s. But I do think that you can get the day two pack with this deck. I think that it's a all right deck. I think that in the new format, if people are preparing for decks like Mitsurugi and Lunalight, then cards like Droll might see more play in the main deck. And I do think that a deck like Orcus is pretty good into those cards. So I do think that Orcus is fine. The next deck, and we're kind of talking about this a little bit early, is Draco Tail. I think that Draco Tail is easily a deck that can get top 8, if not win the event. I think that Draco Tail obviously didn't get hit on the last ban list, so it's probably the ultimate winner of the last ban list, and the deck is just very strong. Like, we're getting more support. Brand Diffusion just went to 2, so it makes the light Draco Tail a little bit better. And the deck is just solid. Like, I don't think it's the highest power level deck. The deck only really does a couple things per turn. Like, it sets up your trap cards, and then you might have, like, a 5 mana in hand with a Pam and an Urgula. But I think that the deck is solid, steady, paced, grindy deck. Is fairly consistent, I would say. Yeah, I just think that Draco Tail is a good deck overall. The next deck is Sky Striker. So Sky Striker is another deck that I see a lot of people messing around with, and I would put it in the 9 through 16 area. I think that this deck is pretty good right now. I think that its matchup into Yummy is very strong. However, I do think that this deck has a losing matchup against Lunalight. I think that you have to heavily prepare for it. Like I've seen some videos of like Joshua Smith going to locals and he's playing cards like Kaiju's on the side, and you have to play like Ham, the Sky Striker Kaiju. Yeah, you have to play those type of cards because this deck will get cooked by a deck like Lunalight. I think that this deck's Mitsurugi matchup was also not bad, which I think is a very good thing for the deck because I don't think that Raigeki type effects are very good against a Sky Striker deck, with a lot of back row. Also, a card like Shark Cannon on Mirakumo seems very, very strong, to cut the recursion. Also, hitting cards like Futsu, I think, will also, in a grind game, will help a lot. The next deck is Regenesis Kashtera. I think this is the first deck I'll put in out by day one. I don't think that this deck is good at all. I think playing this deck, like, obviously, if you like the Regenesis cards, you like the Kashtera cards, this is the deck for you. I think it's a pretty interesting deck. In fact, I'm not even gonna lie. Like, I don't think this deck is very interesting. I think it's like a bad control deck. I think there are much better control decks that you can be playing right now. Decks like Sky Striker that are obviously a lot harder than a deck like Regenesis Kashtera, which is a fairly simple deck. But I think that if you want to actually do well at a YCS, I would not play this deck. The next deck is Crystron K9. This is another deck that I would put in the 9 through 16 range. I think that this deck, while losing 2 copies of Inclusion, the power level of the deck is still insanely high. I think that the main thing that the deck lost was some consistency, which Konami loves to do is hit consistency. I think that losing to Inclusion makes it so that you're opening Solfador plus Jokel a lot less, which I think was the most powerful combination that this deck opened. Like, you even saw that this deck was playing 3 copies of Case, 3 copies of Chaotic Element, just to maximize its chances of opening that Solfador plus Jokel combination, because it was basically the FTK 2-card combo. So they cut off access to the actual Krishan part of the combo. They left full access to the K9 extension, but they cut access to the Krishan extension because that was already the least of the copies that you had. Like, you had more copies of Jokel than you did of Solfador, or like good Solfadors, right? Because like obviously you can play more copies of like Thisvern and Smiger, but those cards are your normal summon, so it kind of obstructs your combo because a lot of the times you would go like River Stormer Search, Scrap Recycler, and then combo with the looping a Scrap Recycler. So now you can't really do that as effectively or consistently, which I think is like a really good thing. But I do think the deck is still crazy. I think it's probably one of the best, if not the best, K9 version that we have left in the game. The next deck is Tierlist Fiendsmith. I think that's what this is. Again, another out day one. I don't think Tier is... I know Tier is a fan favorite deck, probably the best deck of all time at its peak, but now this deck is a shell of what it used to be. There's no Kekalos. There's no Moon even. I don't think that this deck necessarily relied on Moon. This deck played 3 copies of Engraver, 3 copies of Track, and now we do have the Lacrima level 6 fusion, so you're able to make Pilgrim Reaper a lot more consistent, which I think is cute. But you never really had an issue making Pilgrim Reaper with Moon, right? Like, you would just use Necroquip plus an Engraver. I guess now you get the save an Engraver effect, but that's whatever. I just don't think that is that great of a deck. The next deck is Blue Eyes Primite. A lot of people would put this deck in out day one. I don't think that this deck is that terrible. I think that this deck can get day 2. I don't think it's well positioned in the format at all, and it kind of got power crept really quickly. But I do know that a lot of people love Blue Eyes. Blue Eyes being competitive brought a lot more people to the game or back to the game. Just people that are casual fans of the old anime, and it was like, oh, Blue Eyes is competitive. It's fairly affordable now with all the Primite stuff being reprinted. I don't think that it's a terrible deck to play. It is definitely not top tier, but you can definitely get some wins and get a day 2 with Blue Eyes. The next deck actually here is something that I never thought we'd really see on a tier list like this, other than just some more stuff to be put in out day 1, is Sulfur Cord. I think that Sulfur Cord K9 is very slept on. I think it's safe to put it in 17 through 32 for now, because I don't think a lot of people are going to play the deck or are invested into the deck. But I do think that this deck is actually very good. And I think that is something to look out for and definitely know what the cards do. The new Soulful Core cards are very powerful. I know that Vex and Yugioh, shout out to him, just made a video, released a deck profile on this deck. And this is something that I'm definitely going to try on stream. So definitely make sure to subscribe here and go follow on Twitch, because this is a deck that I kind of want to mess around with on stream. But yeah, Soulful Core I think is actually not a terrible deck. The next deck is another Pendulum deck, and that's DDD. I think I would put DDD also in top 32. I think that somebody's going to pull through with DDD. Might be Pascal. Shout out to him. KD 15. But yeah, I think DDD is getting a lot of good support in Doom and Dimension. It's the cover card of Doom and Dimension. It's a DDD card. And the support is pretty good, in my opinion. I think that this deck is a solid combo deck. Puts up pretty powerful boards. It has Floodgates with Dark Contract with Eternity. It has a lot of extension. I do think that the deck is weak to Fualos, though, which I think is a big problem. I think that if your deck doesn't have a good half board into Fualos, I don't think that you can reliably get a top 8 or a top 16. Like, you can maybe sneak into top 16, but a lot of the decks that you're going to see me putting higher up on this list, I think have a really good half board into Fualos. I just don't think that DDD has a very good half board into Falls, and I haven't tested Soulful Core enough to know if it has a good half board into Falls, but these seem like very all or nothing combo decks, so I feel comfortable putting them here, but I do think that they will top the event or the upcoming events. The next deck is Malice. Dormouse. This was my girl, but I think with the banning of Splash Mage and the limiting of Dormouse, I think that this deck is going to fall off heavy. I do think that it will still top the event, but I don't think that it's a top 8 or better deck. Like, last format for Nationals format, I arguably thought it was the best deck. It's fallen off, which is fine. The deck had 6 months in the spotlight, being, in my opinion, the best, if not the second best deck for 6 months. But yeah, I think that the deck has fallen off crazy. I think it's less consistent. The power level is still there, but the consistency is not, and it is slightly less resilient with no Splash Mage, so hand traps are going to be a little bit better against you. The next deck that I wanted to talk about is Lunalight. So Lunalight is an interesting deck because I think Lunalight, when not properly prepared for, could be the best deck. It's a Towers deck, and it probably has the best Towers ever, because usually when you summon a Towers monster, traditionally Towers monsters just sit there and they don't really do anything. I think the first Towers monster that kind of changed that a little bit was Masterpiece, because Masterpiece could like pop a card every turn, so it was kind of like proactive, like advancing your game state. But no, Liger just takes the concept of a Towers deck to the next level. Like, I think that Liger Dancer is probably is definitely probably the best Towers monster of all time. And this deck is crazy when unprepared for it. And if your deck doesn't have it out to Liger, you need to figure something out, because I think that you are going to have an issue with this card if you're not able to have a out to Liger. But there are infinite outs to Liger. There are so many cards that out Liger. That's the issue with this deck. It's like, when this deck is heavily respected, then it becomes a lot easier to deal with, and I think its popularity is going to dwindle as well. The next deck is Mitsurugi Fiendsmith. Mitsurugi Fiendsmith is different than pure Mitsurugi. I guess we can kind of talk about them both at once. I think Mitsurugi Fiendsmith can definitely get like a top 32. I don't think that it's the best way to play Mitsurugi. I feel like it doesn't even solve the issue of Droll anymore. So the main like advantage of Mitsurugi Fiendsmith before compared to pure Mitsurugi is because of Moon of the Cold Sky, you were able to consistently play around Droll and Lockbird, which pure Mitsurugi is extremely weak to, right? Like, but now without Moon, you kind of have to have a level 4 on board and then like Serpent summon another level 4, and it's much harder to do that through a card like Droll. So I don't think that the bricks of Fiendsmith cards outweigh the pros of sometimes playing through Droll, where before it always kind of played through Droll. And the next deck is pure Mitsurugi. I think that pure Mitsurugi, as of the recording of this video, is the best deck of the format. I don't necessarily think it's the deck to beat, but I do think that it is the best deck of the format, actually. The deck that I think is the deck to beat is Yummy, and we're going to talk about that. But I do think that pure Mitsurugi is the best deck of the format. It has, in my opinion, one of the strongest engines. Habakir is at 3, Prayers is at 3. These cards did not get hit. You have access to cards like Pre-Prep, which is an insane starter card for the deck. You have access to all the best hand traps. being Ash, Fua. I know I'm naming hand traps every deck plays, but in particular Impulse. No other deck really up here plays Impulse. The only other deck that can play Impulse is Lunalight, and most Lunalight decks don't even play Impulse because it's a combo deck. But this deck plays Impulse and has access to all the other good hand traps. Like, this deck is very, very strong. It has a lot of utility. Cards like Magitama has Omni negates in the form of Purification. It has its own archetypal kaiju in order to out the Lunalight deck with Wosu. Like, this deck just has infinite utility, an insane grind, and a crazy win condition of Mirakumo. Yeah, I just think that this deck is great right now. The next deck is Mermail, and I kind of want to talk about these next three decks together, being Mermail, Memento, and White Forest. I think that these three decks are very similar in the sense that they're like heavy combo decks, and I would kind of rate them similarly. Mermail, Memento, and White Forest are like tier 2 decks that are like very strong in the sense that when they make their full board, you lose the game. I would say that Memento is definitely the best of the three. I put Memento above a deck like DDD. I think that this deck has crazy half boards, crazy like good supplements into Fua, Pirellia. Like, this deck is not really weak to Charmies or Droll, but I do think that this deck is just not played enough, and I think that the other decks are a little bit stronger than this deck and more rounded, better at going second. Like, I think that this deck really wants to play a board breaker approach, which can be very much taken advantage of by some of these other decks. And yeah, the next deck I would put is Mermail. I think that Mermail is around DDD's level. I would put DDD slightly above it because I think that has the surprise factor, and not everyone knows what this deck does. But I think that Mermail is still a solid deck. It has a lot going on for it. Poseidra, it still has Water Barrier Statue, which is crazy. And the next deck is White Forest. And I think that White Forest is actually the worst of the three. But I still think that it could get top 32, and I think it will get top 32. I think it's definitely the worst of the three. This deck is... I think Droll is going to see a lot of play next format, and this deck is terrible into Droll. I also think that Mermail is really... I think Mermail's a little bit better into Droll. It still gets hindered by Droll, but if you get Drolled, sometimes you can like set up a hand rip early. You also have Deep Sea Coelacanth that you can summon out the deck and then like set up disruptions through Droll. So I think it has good supplements into Droll. I think this deck is terrible into Droll. This deck is terrible into Pirellia, and I think Pirellia will still probably see side deck play. Also, it gets hit randomly by Retaliating Sea sometimes, which I think is crazy. And obviously, but it is alright into Full. I'll say that. The next deck is Mitsurugi Rizal. I think some people are still going to try to play this. I think this is an out by day one deck. Probably the top, if that means anything. I don't think that this deck is particularly good right now. Yeah, I just don't think that is there. I think without King of the Fair Limps, there's no good way to get to Mitsurugi cards with Rizal cards. I guess you can like do Garage Draw too, put it on God. The Mitsurugi cards can still get to the Rizal cards, which is okay. But yeah, it's not a two-way bridge anymore. I don't see a reason to play this deck. The next deck is Yummy. I'd put Yummy here. I think that Yummy is still a really, really good deck. However, I do think that the other decks in this area, I think they all actually have good Yummy matchups, which is crazy that I'm still putting Yummy above them. I just think that Yummy is has such a solid engine. It's so consistent. It does the same thing pretty much every time. Every hand kind of combos at least. Like, it's a little bit weaker going second than I would say these other decks. I think these other decks actually are pretty strong going second. Even Lunalight, I think that like it has a lot of pushes going second. And Dracotail has turn 0 play, so sometimes it's not even starting to play on its actual first turn. It's starting to play on your turn. Yummy doesn't really have those options. It just starts playing on its actual turn. So I think that is weaker than these decks going second. But I do think that Yummy is still really, really powerful and a deck that needs to be respected. And I think that the crazy thing is it's being respected the most on this list, even though I don't think it's the best deck. And I think that actually hurts how good it is. I think that because Yummy is so respected, I think it's going to drop down below Dracotail. I still think it's better than Lunalight in the sense that I think that Lunalight is more easily exploited than Yummy in the sense that like even though Yummy is weak to pretty much every board breaker, and go check out the board breaker video on the channel, I still think that a lot of the times it can play, right? Like even if you get board broken, like you're still in the game, you still have hand traps, or a mix, cards like Droplets, cards like Purge, Ash, whatever you decide to play. I think Lunalight, when their Ligers gets outed, or their double Liger gets outed, I think any competent deck like auto wins the game. Like you auto lose once your Ligers gets outed, as opposed to like Yummy, which can still kind of like play the game. And I think that Yummy also is a little bit better than Luna because Yummy has so much space for non-engine that it can kind of cover these matchups, all of these matchups that it's weak to in the side. It just has that much room. So yeah, that's how I feel about Yummy at the moment. The next deck is Vanquish Soul. And I'll put it... Nah, I'm lying. I'm not going to put it there. I think that Vanquish Soul, funny enough, I still think that Vanquish Soul is still able to get top 32. I think that Vanquish Soul did lose to Rosin, to Stake Your Soul. The consistency is shot. Like, it's definitely not a deck I would suggest, but in Vanquish Soul's defense, Vanquish Soul was already a high roll deck. You're just gonna have to high roll your way into a top 32. I don't think enough people are gonna play the deck that it can be consistently getting 16 to first place. But I do think that there's gonna be some mad lad that pulls up with Vanquish Soul and he has a crazy run and gets top 32 with Vanquish Soul. Like the deck is just too high roll. Like somebody's gonna pull up and just draw Sue going second all day and it's gonna be like nothing ever happened, you know? But I don't think that it's a consistent top tier contender anymore. The next deck is Zodiac. I think that Zodiac is out day one. I think that Zodiac is past his prime. It's just not a good deck anymore. Like, why are we playing a card like Dryden when we could be playing a card like Detonator, which is just a infinitely better Dryden? The next deck is actually Rizal. And realistically, I think that I would put Rizal. I think that I really want to put Rizal here. And when I say Rizal, I mean Onomot Rizal. I think that Onomot Rizal and Pure Rizal, low-key, even though X went to 1, I think that they were slightly winners from this ban list in the sense that we expected Rizal to get hit much harder. Like, we were expecting, like, Flame Banshee. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Like cards like Flame Banshee to get banned, cards like Dual Drive to potentially get banned, Cross to get banned. They really just got X to 1, slap on the wrist, and was let go. We still had Detonator at 1, 3 Cross, 3 copies of Dual Drive, 3 copies of Tachyon, 3 copies of Ascension, all the Onomot cards. Like you still can do Baguska, Photon Lord, crossboards. Like you can still do a lot of stuff with this deck, and Detonator is still a great card, you know. Yeah, so I think that this deck is actually not terrible, and I can see this deck doing pretty well at the next couple of events. The next deck is Fiendsmith Rizal. Again, the bridge moon has been cut. Obviously, this deck still has Exciton Knight, but you also have to think the main starter of this deck, as opposed to like the other decks, is you didn't want to lock yourself into Xyz, so you really wanted copies of Ice. And as soon as we saw Ice go to 2 and Bonfire go to 1, we already saw this deck kind of disappear. Obviously, Shu got second with it. Shout out to Shu. But this deck kind of disappeared from the meta as soon as those hits happened, and I don't think that anything on this ban list... I think it actually, if anything, it got worse, right? Because now you need specifically 2 level 4s to get into Moon. Before, at least with the deck, like, if you were able to play cards like Nibiru, because you can turn Nibiru plus a hand trap and convert them into Fiendsmith Engine and Lacrimal, which was the level 4. I think losing Moon definitely hurts this deck. And then Malice, Fiendsmith, I thought this deck was terrible before. This deck is still probably terrible now. But yeah, guys, this is kind of my opinions on where we're at right now at the game. If you guys like these type of videos and want to see more, definitely make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.